Hey guys, I'm back with round 4 from the Gibraltar Masters. Today was a pretty clean day at the office. I had a nice win. I basically needed to calculate some lines in this game, find some accurate moves, and I feel like I was able to do that good enough and win a nice one. Okay, so my opponent was WIM here, rated around 2200, Srija Seshadri, and judging by her results from the last year, she's actually been having a really good year, so I felt like this was going to be a tough game. But I think I kind of caught her in the opening a little bit because she wasn't familiar with the resulting position and kind of went for something dubious. I chose kind of a specific move order here from the opening. Sometimes I like to mix it up against low-rated players to see if I can get them to transpose to something that they're not familiar with. But actually she's a semi-slav player, so I think by playing c6 here and going for the setup with bishop b7, knight d7, black ends up getting a semi-slav type of position that they would want. But actually I was fine with this as well because I've played the setup, the eventual setup that we're going to get in the game a few times now with good results, so I was feeling quite comfortable. So yeah, bishop b7, bishop d3, knight d7, castles, castles, and queen c2. So I've had this position on the board a handful of times in tournament games. And white's setup is very natural. The idea is to break with e4 in the near future, sometimes preparing it with moves like rook ad1 and rook fe1. Here black played rook c8 after a little bit of thought, so I figured might be out of book and just kind of improvising at this point, but rook c8 is a very natural move. Black could already just play c5 right away, but typically white will take on d5 here, and then after e takes d5, something like bishop f5, though maybe not right away. And white gets a pretty healthy structure here. The point is that whenever black takes on d4, white wants to recapture with the knight and leave black with this isolated queen pawn. Make that yellow. Black doesn't have to take, of course, on d4 and probably shouldn't, but white can kind of build up pressure with moves like rook ac1, rook fd1, knight b5, knight e5, etc. And white just kind of puts as much pressure on the position as possible. Okay, instead rook c8 was played, and here I went for this move e4. So previously in this position I played rook ad1, but I actually couldn't remember during the game whether I played rook ad1 before or whether I played e4 before, and which one of these moves was better according to my file. I'm happy to say that e4 is the right move. I think at least this is what I have in my notes as should be played for white. And here black has a choice. They can take on c4 or on e4. Taking on c4 definitely leads to a sharp game. I think white should recapture with the pawn here. There are also positions where white can take back with the bishop. In both of these cases, black typically plays e5 and then white goes knight e2. Kind of keeping the tension in the center. And yeah, these positions are quite sharp. Instead here black played d takes e4, which I think is a more solid choice. Knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. So this is still in my book, and the main line here is knight f6, white goes back bishop d3, and black here typically tries to organize this freeing pawn break c6, c5. So right away it doesn't work because white can take on c5, black kind of has to recapture, and then white takes on f6 and ends up winning a pawn on h7. That's why this queen c2, bishop d3 battery is so useful in these lines. It's always putting pressure on the king side, and then bishop comes back with bishop b4, and white is just up a pawn here. So black has to prepare this move. There's moves like h6, for example, and then white continues strengthening the position. Yeah, further moves are like rook fe1. And at some point, white will even want to just play c5 ourselves, just shutting in the light squared bishop. And this is kind of like a typical middle game position for this line. So I would definitely feel comfortable here as well. But here, after bishop takes e4, black started thinking. And so I figure she must be thinking about one of two moves, if not knight f6, which to me seemed like the most natural, even if you don't know the theory in the position. I guess h6, or potentially kind of more aggressive with f5. And I don't think I have either of these moves in my notes. I mean, h6 seems like it'll just kind of transpose to one of the other lines. f5, I really couldn't remember if I looked at this or not. So during the game, I was kind of hoping she would play it because it looked quite dubious just to weaken the e6 pawn so dramatically. But black spent some time here and ended up playing f5 and kind of going for this sharp idea. And this is actually a pretty typical motive for the semi-Slav positions, but I think it's just kind of a wrong situation to do it because white is very well equipped to meet with this. So I have to go back bishop d3 and then c5. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense for black to play f5 and then keep the light square bishop closed, because otherwise, I mean, white is just going to get rook e1, queen e2 in for free, and then the e6 pawn is just a huge weakness. So c5 is the intended follow-up, and now white definitely has a choice here, but I think I found the most active continuation. And I really wanted to make the move d5 work because it seems like the most principled, and I think I found the right approach here. Okay, so d5. I'm just trying to crack black open on the light squares. I'm no longer trying to win the pawn on e6 because I'm letting black trade it off, but rather just trying to open up the diagonal and especially use the bishop on b2 and the bishop on d3 here. I think are going to be really strong pieces. So unfortunately for black, they can't play e5 because the f5 pawn is simply hanging. So e takes d5 is almost forced. And now my idea is actually not to take on f5, because here I was really concerned about this move d4, just shutting down the bishop on b2 and opening up the bishop on b7, so like a great, positional sacrifice. And then I was trying to make this line work with bishop takes h7 check, king h8, and bishop e4, and I figured white might be okay here. I mean, might be doing well with the extra pawn, but it looked a little bit scary, especially lines like rook takes f3. So if I take on f3 with anything, I think it's just losing. Like g takes f3, queen h4, and I just don't have a good way to defend the h2 pawn. It looks like white is just totally busted. Bishop takes f3, black will take on f3 and do the same thing. But I saw I would be able to take on b7 here, but this just looked so potentially scary. I mean, queen h4. g3 looks okay for white because all of black's rooks are hanging and the queen as well. Checking this after the game with the engine, Stockfish points out this move, bishop takes h2 check. And apparently, like, black can sacrifice an entire rook here and you can get this knight e5. And, with best play, white is something like plus 1.3 or maybe a little bit more, 1.5. So if you're up a rook and you're only getting plus 1.5, it means it's like not that great of an advantage, and black has some serious compensation. And yeah, I wouldn't want to be in a position where I have to find like computer moves, just to survive. So I was definitely looking for a way to keep the initiative here, and after e takes d5, much simpler for white is to just take back. So now black has problems here because if bishop takes d5, I could take on f5, but my idea here is actually to play bishop c4. And the point is I'm trading off the light squared bishops, but I'm getting my queen to kind of replace my bishop on this diagonal. I'm getting my rook to come to d1 next. And black just has too many weaknesses here. So for instance, bishop takes c4, queen takes c4 check, king h8. I think I would start with rook ad1 here. And if a move like queen e7, this always runs into rook fe1, queen c7. I think queen e6 here is just picking up a piece because I'm having this double attack. During the game, I wasn't quite sure about knight f6. I figured this might be the best defense, trying to get the knight to e4. But it looked so dangerous, even a move like knight to e5 or bishop e5 also looks dangerous, but knight e5 as well, threatening knight f7 check. Yeah, so this just looked very, very difficult for black, and I think the computer confirms that white is winning in these lines. So the pawn cannot really be taken. White just gets way too much pressure. I mean, again, this long diagonal is open, and the fact that this pawn is on f5 is a serious issue for black. After some thought, black finally played g6, which I think was at least the best try, but just having to defend the pawn on f5 and hoping to keep some solidity with knight to f6. And here it seems like white should just be absolutely crushing. I mean, the open diagonal is so juicy, but it's not that easy. I mean, for instance, queen c3, other than knight f6, black could actually just play like queen f6 here. And I don't think white has anything better than retreating with the queen. So I go for this move, rook fe1. I thought this was just kind of simple and straightforward, activating my rook, trying to get rook e6, and eventually this will be putting a lot of pressure on the f6 square. So I'm really just thinking about the critical points in the position and where I'm going to need to break through. Here, if black had played something like knight f6, I was kind of expecting this. I think I would have continued rook ad1. Again, this pawn is just very difficult for black to take, as bishop c4, and just too many weaknesses, too many open lines for white's pieces. So I was thinking something like rook c7, and then during the game I was trying to figure out these lines with like knight g5, because this is really the move white wants to play, trying to get knight e6. But black has this trick with bishop takes h2 check, and I wasn't exactly sure what's going on here, but it is pretty clearly just good for white. Knight g4 check, king g1, queen takes g5, and then Stockfish points out bishop c4 is probably the best move, threatening d6, which is just devastating. Also moves like queen c3 are in the position, and then rook e7, and yeah, it's just very, very, it's like plus 10. So yeah, black is just totally busted. Maybe a little bit less than plus 10, I'm not sure about that, but it's bad. In any case, black decides to play this move, c4, which I think at this point was just a good practical try, because with normal play, you know, white is just breaking through, I think, very easily with rook d1, knight g5, and so on. So c4 is an attempt to kind of imbalance the position. I think it is kind of the right approach. But I was able to kind of sort through the lines here and find like a pretty convincing finish. So I played b takes c4. And black's idea is to give the pawn, but to kind of shut down this diagonal, so I don't have all of these like bishop c4 ideas. And now black plays bishop takes d5. Okay, so here I started calculating, of course, or I should say move before. I already kind of figured out what I wanted to do here. But I would say this is a good time to pause the video and try to find the strongest continuation for white. Okay, so my first thought was like, you know, queen c3, moving the queen somewhere with like tempo, so that the bishop or black has to cover something. Maybe the bishop has to move, or covering the mate. But queen c3 I think runs, or just allows knight f6, and I still can't take the bishop, of course. So I didn't see such a great follow-up here. Queen d2 was definitely possible, trying to get to h6, but again, once I get to h6, black will cover with knight f6, and then it's not clear exactly what the follow-up is, although it's quite possible that white is doing well here as well. Eventually I found queen b3, which I felt like was the strongest move, and fortunately Stockfish kind of confirms this idea. Okay, the point is to line up against black's king. I'm also stepping out of the pin, so the bishop is now hanging, and this move c5 check is a huge problem for black. So the key point here in this line and all previous lines is that if black ever plays knight c5, I just meet this with queen c3, and then black doesn't have the knight to block on f6. So this is like really, really important detail. Black can still try to, let's say, give back some material with rook f6. The point being, if I grab this rook, then bishop takes f3, and then my bishop on d3 is hanging, and so maybe black can even get a position where they're down in exchange, but with some holding chances. For instance, I was thinking about this line, g takes f3, knight takes d3, rook d1. From afar, I thought this is just winning for white because I'm up the exchange and I'm winning another piece. Then I realized black has this move, bishop e5, and I think I'm forced to take here, knight takes e5, and like this is exactly the type of position that I would love to avoid, because I'm like up in exchange, but my pawns are all weak. The knight seems, you know, pretty stable on e5, can be supported like rook c5. Black has no weaknesses. This would be a real difficult endgame to win, I think. Although white probably has decent chances. Instead, after rook f6, I realize I'm not obliged to capture right away, and it's a lot stronger just to play c takes d5, just grabbing the piece. Then if knight takes d3, I can either take on f6 or take on d3. Either way, white ends up with an extra piece here as well. So once you see knight c5, queen c3 is kind of working for white, like all the material is good, then I think the next and probably critical move was like bishop takes f3, which ended up happening in the game. One last line, one of the points behind this line is that if black retreats with bishop f7, then again I play queen c3 and black doesn't have this block with knight f6, which is another kind of important detail. So bishop takes f3 was played, and then of course white throws in c5 check. And now black just doesn't have a great way to block. Of course, bishop d5 is not good, so rook f7 is kind of forced. And here, I don't know what really happened. I would say this is the one moment where my play can definitely be criticized, because I saw what I felt like were two winning moves here, c takes d6 and bishop c4. And I think I chose wrong. I mean, both moves are objectively winning, but bishop c4 would have ended the game, I think, much sooner. And I should have gone for this one. So now, okay, white is currently down a piece, but all the bishops are hanging, this rook is hanging, and black's king is on the verge of getting checkmated with moves like queen c3 still in the position. So this is really just lost for black. I saw one chance like bishop takes h2. It's not really a chance, it's more like a forcing move that looks scary at first, but it doesn't really work. Check, king g1, and black just runs out of ideas, because in all these lines I'm threatening to just grab on f3 and kill this bishop. So bishop c4 I think would have been the easiest win. I really should have gone for that. Instead I convinced myself to just play c takes d6, and this also looks good. I mean, I've won back my piece, I'm threatening bishop c4, I'm threatening to take on f3, and I'm also threatening rook e7. So all this looked good, but actually black is a interesting way to squirm out, at least for a couple more moves. So starting with the move queen g5, hitting g2 and threatening mate. So I just like totally missed that this move was even possible, and that's kind of shame on me because I should have been looking for just every forcing move in the position, and this one definitely sticks out. Fortunately for me, I have like an easy defense with bishop f1. I mean, I'm pretty sure g3 here would also be winning for white because I can always defend these squares with bishop f1, but okay, bishop f1 is a lot safer, not making this weakness, and also hitting the bishop on f3. So black plays bishop e4, and I think I was a little bit shocked at first that I missed queen g5, and I was lucky, like I have a comfortable defense there. But now I kind of found my groove, and I realized that the position is still just completely winning for white. So f3, definitely an important move. I have to like break this blockade. Black doesn't really have a lot of squares with the bishop. She played bishop c2, and then I decided to put my queen on d5. I chose d5 instead of e6, which I think also was a natural choice, just to keep the rook open and able to go to e7. And if a move like rook c5, I mean, all the tactics are really in white's favor here. Rook e8 check, knight f8, and then a nice finish with rook takes and queen a8 mate. Or queen a8 check followed by mate. Instead, black played knight to f6. And now I played queen e6, hitting the rook. Rook e8 runs into another nice mate with just queen takes, and then the bishop comes to c4. So there were a lot of lines like this, but unfortunately none of them really transpired on the board. Instead, black played rook f8, but now it's just like white has so much pressure here, and the d pawn is really strong that I think it's just, well, yeah, clearly winning by force. Bishop c4, threatening to take the knight on f6 because of the pin. Black is forced to play king g7, stepping out of one pin but walking into another. Here I push d7. Now I think, okay, white probably has a ton of ways to win, but this seemed like the most forcing and direct. I'm threatening to either queen first or take on f7 and then queen in either order and just win a bunch of material. And the game didn't last long. Queen d2, rook e2, queen b4, I took on c2, rook e7, and bishop takes f6. This was just the end of the game. Rook takes f6, and queen takes f6 check. The point is, after queen takes f6, king takes f6, I promote to a new queen. I'm now up a rook and bishop, and I've pinned the rook to the king, so black doesn't even have this one like counter check rook e1, although that wouldn't be all that great either. But in any case, this was basically the end of the game. So I was pretty happy with this one. I mean, it was like basically a few moments in the middle game that I had to just calculate accurately and make a good decision. But once I saw f5, bishop d3, and c5 on the board, you know, d5 definitely felt like the critical try. At least intuitively, I kind of felt this was right. And then, you know, seeing some of these lines I think was not too difficult. It was all just kind of focusing on where black's weaknesses were. And so I was able to find the right ideas. Then after queen b3, I was basically over here. Black is just losing material by force. And yeah, I was a little miffed that I I kind of allowed this like one, you know, spurt of counterplay. Bishop c4 here I think would have been a much cleaner finish. But okay, can't complain. A win is a win, and that was definitely a pretty clean one. So I'm on 2.5 out of 4. I'll probably be playing up again tomorrow, so I'm sure that'll be a tough game. And hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.